My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you are interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Tianyu Shade. Should I call you Tianyu Shade or Collin?
You can call me Collin.
All right, Collin. We're so excited to have you tonight. For those of you who don't know who Collin is, he's one of the founders of the Do or Do Not podcast, and he is the original producer before he started his residency. So Collin, I know you're really busy. Thank you for spending time with us.
No, not at all. I never sacrifice anything, and I'm so glad to be here. I'm just a little nervous because it's my first time on the opposite end, so things are a little different. I can't cut out what I want to cut out.
I'm sure you'll be fine. I don't think we'll need to cut anything, but Collin, start by telling me where you are right now and what you're doing and what your normal, now I know you have different rotations for residency, but what an average day would look like for you.
Right now, I'm PGY1, so I'm in my intern year doing my internal medicine residency at NYU Winthrop, also now known as NYU Long Island. I'm in Mineola. I live near the hospital, and my day-to-day looks, different every day because when you're an intern, you're kind of on different rotations, different services. So depending on what service you're on, whether you're servicing a hospitalist floor, or maybe you'll be in the ICU or the critical care unit or in the emergency department, it all depends. So right now I'm in the cardiac critical unit, which is kind of like the intensive care unit, the ICU. But here we service patients with primarily heart issues that are, refractory to a lot of treatments and are in very critical states. So that's what my day currently looks like. And it's usually, like a 12-hour shift currently. So
now you just got out of medical school, right? You're like 6 months into your residency. So you have a good perspective. So my question for you is this what you were expecting? Is residency what you thought it was? And is it easier than medical school or harder than medical school?
That's an interesting question because I think it's what you expect because you've kind of seen these things in medical school, but at the same time, it's a completely different beast. It's what you've seen in medical school, but it's like jacked up on steroids. So whatever you see in medical school, whatever you see on your day-to-day rotation right here, you're going to be primarily responsible and you're going to be the point of contact and the point of care for a lot of these patients. So while you might only be caring for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 patients while you're a medical student, here you could carry upwards of maybe, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you're also responsible for putting in the orders, making sure all the notes are done, and making sure you update families, which is sometimes different than from being a medical student because sometimes you can default for someone for help. And while you can do that as an intern as well, you're expected to have a lot more responsibility.
Now, do you feel like your med school experience really prepared you for this? How do you feel about your medical school and coming into residency?
Same thing with Dr. Storch and a lot of our guests. I also come from NYITCOM and I did my 4 years there. And being there, you're allowed to rotate a lot of different places. So you kind of have a wide view of all these different hospitals that you go to. You can see how things are run in a community hospital or an academic hospital, and even location definitely matters. So while whether it be you're here in Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx, or somewhere in Long Island, these practices vary a lot. So being exposed to these different places and knowing what you're going to set foot into helps a lot. And I think I was pretty decently prepared for this experience. But obviously everything is a learning curve. So.
Now, your residency, I know a little bit about your residency, obviously. It's an NYU affiliate, and there are a good number of MDs and DOs in your program. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's a good mix. There's a lot of DOs, there's a lot of MDs, both from, what people interpret as, the classic MDs from United States schools and MDs from Caribbean schools. So it's a great mix of everyone.
And how do you feel like you're matching up against those other students? Do you feel any deficiency? Were you nervous when you first started, or were you running out of the gate?
I think I perceive myself as, someone who's, I don't think I'm a superstar or anything like that. I think everyone is anxious when they come into residency because, like I said before, you're going to be primarily responsible, and that's a big burden to carry, and that's something that you have to adjust to. So I think everyone coming in was nervous, and I definitely was nervous as well. But getting feedback from everyone around me, from my program director and from my seniors, I think that I'm not mismanaging, and I think I'm growing at a level that is expected along with all my peers. So I don't think I'm necessarily deficient in my training. And, you can only hope to grow with the residency and with your peers around you.
I'm sure you're doing a great job. You're always very modest, and I appreciate that. Usually, Collin, as you know, we rewind all the way back, but I'm actually going to start by just taking like 2 steps back. So there are a lot of people listening to the podcast that are medical students that are thinking about or are in the middle of interviewing for programs. So you obviously applied to a number of medicine programs and had to make a rank list, and a lot of it was done remotely as well. So can you tell us a little bit about your interview process, maybe what your top contenders for residency were? And I know obviously that NYU Winthrop was your top choice, and why you ranked it so highly, what attracted you to that residency, and tell us a little bit about the process for you.
I don't envy anyone who's in the position of applying right now because it's a similar situation as it was last year. Last year, it was also all virtual interviews, and you can't really get that good of a sense of a place until you're really there. So that part, I felt like I was definitely missing out on. I know there's some things that are changing this year. I believe there's like a token system that medical students have to kind of show interest to these places. I think what's important to think about when you're picking a place is definitely what you want to do with your future. So I think the number one thing to always think of is fellowships. When it comes in terms of fellowships, like you told me, Dr. Storch, it's always most important to see, what you have in-house, because that's always going to be one of your best chances to match. So to me, that was the most important thing to me. And I want to do gastroenterology, which is extremely competitive. And I know that, so I really only applied to programs with that fellowship. And I allowed that to kind of guide my choice into where I wanted to go. Besides Winthrop, I had other places on my list like Stony Brook, but they were mostly in the New York region. I wanted to stay kind of close to home. This is where I grew up. So I like the atmosphere here. I like being close to my family. And I wanted to look for academic institutions where I can get great training. And, the key to being a great fellow is to be a great internal medicine resident first, like you always told me. So that's what I wanted to do. Look for somewhere that has in-house fellowships and look for somewhere where you get great training. And training can come in a lot of ways. It's not just learning, it's also procedures and the patient panel that you see. In terms of other things from last year and this year, like I said, there's still virtual interviews. So it's always important to try as best as you can to get a feel for the program. And I know that's difficult because you only have kind of this interview, which is a couple of hours long on Zoom. So it's always important to do your research before you go to a program. Look at the housing nearby, look at, what stipends they can give you, look at the residents and how they come off towards you, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people, and it's always going to be a good idea to have people that you think you might mesh well with.
Now, Collin, obviously I know a little bit of your story, so I'm going to delve into some things that I know. I know that when you were doing your 4th year clerkships, you put a lot of thought into rotating in places that you thought that might be a good fit for you so that you could see those programs and so that those programs can see you? How important was that when you applied?
Oh, it was extremely important. It's kind of sucked because, and I'm sure it's like this year too, you were kind of restricted geographically. You weren't really allowed to go outside of the tri-state area, which was okay for me, but that might not be okay for a lot of other people because some of their rank list might be outside of that region. But to me, it was extremely important that I go to these places like NYU Winthrop and Stony Brook. They weren't at that time, they weren't taking any visiting students, but wherever you get a chance to see, even if you don't think that you're necessarily going to go to that place, I think it's always important to see what a hospital is like and see how the training is there, because then you can use it as a reference to basic set that, so in the back of your mind, okay, this is a level of training that this place has. What about this other place? And then you can compare places. So rotating for a month at NYU Winthrop, I got to see what the inner workings were like. I got to see what some of the residents were like. I got to see what the program was like. I got to see what the hours were like. I got to see what the patient panel was like. So I think it's always extremely important that you rotate at a place that you want to go to, but I know it's not always feasible given this year's restrictions.
And although you're modest, Collin, I would have to think that showcasing at NYU Winthrop and working with the residents had a big part in your getting a very competitive internal medicine residency. You think that's correct?
I would hope to think so, because I think it's a two-way street. So if you don't know what they're like, they might not necessarily know what you're like either. When you only have 5 hours to interview with them, they only have 5 hours to interview you. So whatever superficial layer that you might see from them, they see the same exact thing from you. So I think that's always important to think about when you're rotating a place. I'm not a program director, so I don't know, how what's ranked necessarily the highest. I'm sure it's different for every place, but I imagine that after your USMLE and COMLEX scores, rotating at a place and having good evaluations from there probably comes to a close second.
That makes a lot of sense, Collin. Thank you. So now I'm going to actually go back and specifically, as you know, when I talk to some of the students that are doing interviews, I always tell them to think about things that are important for the individual and what they can share. So for you, when I was thinking about this interview, I know that, first of all, you're first generation American. That's correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then you actually ended up doing a 7-year medical program. So you actually got into medical school right after high school, basically. So can you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in medicine and how you decided at such an early age that you wanted to apply for a 7-year med program?
Definitely. I think it's important to address something first. There might be a lot of medical students or pre-meds that are unsure of what they want to do or they want to go in, or, they might not necessarily have a burning passion, and I think it's important to say that that's okay. Not everyone is going to wake up and dedicate their whole life to this. And that's okay, because some people aren't sure of what they want to do yet. And that takes time. And you shouldn't push yourself to apply to something that you're not ready for, because that'll, tax you mentally and that'll be on your shoulder for a long time. So I think it's important to say that first. I applied right after high school. So I interviewed for colleges normally. So it's almost a guaranteed admission to medical school from college. So it's a 3+4 program. I did 3 years undergraduate at SUNY New Paltz upstate, and then 4 years at NYITCOM. And as long as I met a certain threshold on my MCAT score, I just had to do a abbreviated interview, and then I was almost guaranteed acceptance into medical school. The reason I wanted to do medicine, and from the beginning, I didn't know what specialty I wanted to go into, but I think it was always, there was a part of it that was how I was raised. I'm sure everyone knows being in Asian culture is only a couple of jobs that your parents would be happy to, to brag about. So there has to be some initial force. And I guess that was that. And after that, the physiology was extremely interesting to me. And being able to make a difference in people's lives also definitely played a different part. So putting, those couple of things together, there's only a certain amount of things that you can do with that. So I'm not going to say I was like born day one, I was ready to become a doctor and that's all I want to do in my life. These are things that you have to learn and they have to come to you. So it's okay that if you don't know that you want to do this right away. I think college, especially important time to discover yourself, because for a lot of people, that's the first time that you're going to be away from your parents or kind of at college by yourself. And you get to discover what you want to do and what interests you. So I think that's definitely important. And that's where I honed in on what kind of medicine I want to do. And there's a lot of fields. You can do PA, you can become a nurse, you can do MP, you can become a respiratory therapist. There are a lot of things that you can do in medicine. So college was a time that allowed me to discover, what I really wanted to do with my future.
So Collin, just getting back to that high school point, how did you find out that NYITCOM had this program? How did you decide that you wanted to take a shorter path and go directly into medical school? At what year did you find out about that? When did you decide? When did you commit? And what did you do to secure? And I know you're always modest when we have these discussions, but I mean, those are very coveted positions. Even though you would think that most people don't know what they want to do when they're 12 years old, I feel like you have to know what you want to do when you're 12 years old in order to get into one of these programs. So again, especially for people that are listening that maybe are interested, can you tell us kind of what put you on the path and how you executed?
Yeah, I mean, I always had an idea generally that I really liked the science and the physiology behind it. So that's kind of where I was leaning towards, but I wasn't exactly sure during that high school period. And I kind of have a motto or a way of thinking, and I adjusted, obviously. It's shoot for the stars and land on the moon. So always give your best so that you don't live a day without regret and you know that you tried your best. So even if you want to do something else that might be in a different way, I would know that I put my all to that and then I can do something else in the meantime. So for the most part, becoming a physician is probably the top of the food chain in a way to say it. It's going to be the hardest thing, the hardest path to overcome. So if I shoot for that path and I eventually decide I want to do something else, I'll have most of the credits if I go to college, and then I can switch to something else. So that's the way I thought about it. And that's why I started to investigate programs. And I knew at that time that going into med school was extremely competitive from college. And if there was a better way to better my odds and secure a position early on, that would make it easier for me in the future to have that way in paid for me. So since that was the way I thought about it, I started researching programs that had a guaranteed acceptance in a sense if you get a certain score or whatever, because most programs you still have to meet a cutoff on the MCAT. So I looked into all those programs and I applied to some of those. I didn't meet all the criteria to those. I had a pretty good SAT score and my averages were okay. So I was just basically looking for programs that had a way in to make it easier for me in the future if being a physician is what I wanted to do.
Okay, so you did this program and you went in, you spent 3 years at New Paltz, is that correct?
Yes.
And then you started, so now when you start medical school, at that point, you're basically at least 1 year younger than most of the students. And of course, there are plenty of students, especially in osteopathic school, that start a little bit later. So you were probably the youngest person in your class, right?
Yeah, I was definitely one of the youngest. There are also other students in the BSDO 7-year program because NYT has affiliations with multiple places like NYT itself. Obviously, they have a BSDO 7-year, and I believe SUNY Geneseo. So yes, I was one of the younger ones.
And now, did you think that was an advantage or a disadvantage Did you bond with the other students while you're there? Did you feel a little removed because you were a younger student?
I'm going to answer the second part of that question first. I bonded with a lot of people because med school, people bond over trauma. So people always, I didn't have trouble finding other people who were like-minded, even if they might have been a couple of years older. Everyone's in this together. We're all just trying to survive at the end of the day. So I didn't really think that was an issue. But I did think that being younger was a disadvantage. I didn't think it was an advantage. I mean, it could be an advantage if, in a sense that maybe I was more youthful, I had more energy. But sometimes being like that, you have less drive. There might be less sense of urgency. Some of these other candidates who are a little bit older, they've been doing this for a while. They have a family to support. And, taking 4 years out of their life when they have a wife and kids and children is no easy task. So I would say that I was at a disadvantage because I had, compared to some of these people, I might have had less drive than them. I might have had less motivation. And, that's not just me being modest. Sometimes I would look at these people and they would be so much more motivated than I was. And I would be so fond of them. And I would look up to them and I would try to be more like them. And I would also have less experience than them. Just by being older, you have more life experience. You've seen more things, you've been through more things, and you have that dedication. And obviously that doesn't apply to everyone, but I think to me, it was rather a disadvantage rather than an advantage.
It's interesting, Collin. Collin, I'm going to go into a little personal questions. If there are questions you don't want to answer, certainly you can defer. And again, I know you very well, obviously, so it's easy for me to dig into some of these questions. My first question is, when you went to medical school, you decided to live home with your parents. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, I live with my parents.
So can you talk a little bit about this? Obviously, you went away to New Paltz. You lived away from home for that time. When you came back, was that a tough decision? It's so interesting. I actually went away also, and I came back, and a few of my friends stayed with their parents, and I decided to live away, to live on my own with a few other students. And there are pros and cons to both, but maybe you can talk about what your experience was like and what the pros and cons were.
Yeah, everyone's mileage is going to vary on that account. How much do you like your parents and how well you can tolerate them? I can tolerate mine pretty well, and jokingly said, I love my parents. They do everything they can to provide for me. Being at New Paltz, I really had no choice. I was like 100 miles away from them, so I had to kind of live there. If I had the choice, I would still probably, live away from them. I think everyone needs their growth period. They can't always be in the shadow of someone else, of their parents, telling them and suggesting what to do. Sometimes you just have to learn these things on your own. And I think college is a super important time for self-growth and finding yourself. When I came back to medical school is minimum 40K a year. And at NYT, it was pretty much like 60, 65 a year. So being at home allowed me to save that quintessential 20 to 30 grand that would otherwise be spent living outside. And also, not even just that, I think more importantly is time. Time is the most essential currency that you can have, right? You can't buy more time. Time is really the most important thing that you have. And being at home allowed me to save time and use it to other things that are important, like studying and getting rest. So when living at home, I could count on my parents to cook me dinner when I get home. I can expect a warm, tasty meal when I get home, and I expect, and they know that I'm busy, so I know that, a lot of these things will be taken care of. And that's why I say your mileage may vary depending on how good your bond is with your parents.
Yeah, Collin, I can definitely relate because I ate a lot of oatmeal and ramen noodles that I definitely remember from medical school, and a warm meal definitely could have tipped the scale on the other side. My other question for you, Collin, again, a little bit personal, is that I know you worked a little bit during medical school. I don't know how the heck you did that, but did you find that spending time working and going to school at the same time I mean, that sounds impossible to me. Can you explain how you had enough time in the day to study, get good grades, get into NYU Winthrop, and work?
To be honest, Dr. Storch, I don't really know how I did it either. That whole time was blurred to me, but I knew loans are always going to be ridiculous. Having like 200K plus in loans is difficult to look at whenever you open up your bank account and your statement or whatever. But it's something that I've heard previously that every doctor pays off. Whether you pay it off a little slower or a little faster, you're going to pay it off. So that's not something that you should worry about. But I didn't want to put that burden on my parents. They were trying to pay it for me, even though I didn't want them to. And that's the kind of relationship I just had with them. You know, obviously we couldn't pay it all up front and we had to pay in increments, but I at least wanted to make some money to alleviate that burden, to at least, you know, pay for some of my own meals or pay for some of the things, my recreational activities, because otherwise they would be paying for those things on top of housing me and feeding me. And I wanted to do that at least for myself. And how did I find the time? I mean, you know, luckily when I was working, the boss was lenient. So he allowed me to study while I was on shift. So, you know, whenever there weren't a lot of customers, it was a grocery store. So whenever there weren't a lot of customers, I was, you know, opening up, whether it be Anki or UWorld or whatever it was, and, you know, just kind of get my studying in at that time. And obviously I wouldn't be working during essential times. Like if I was preparing for my board exams, it was only to brush up on my knowledge before rotation started.
Collin, I think you're amazing. No matter how modest you continue to be, these are all things that as you know, I'm a workhorse, but I don't think I could have done that. So you get full credit from me on all those things.
I think you could have done it, Dr. Storch.
I appreciate that. All right, Collin. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask you a little bit about your career choice. So can you tell us how or when you decided that you wanted a career in gastroenterology?
I think that came maybe my second or third year of medical school. The realization I pieced it together when I thought about what I really wanted to do. There was a certain interview I remember in the past, I was saying, you know, the most important thing is to think about, you know, surgical or non-surgical subspecialty, which I think is a fair thing to say. And I knew that I wouldn't be fit for that surgical lifestyle. So I knew that wouldn't be for me. But that being said, I did really like working with my hands. And GI is one of, you know, the most procedure heavy. And it's not just that. Gastroenterology encompasses a wide variety of things, and it's not just the stomach, right? You have the esophagus, you have the colon, you have the liver. And there's so many organ systems that are involved, and there's so much pathology and physiology that are interlinked. So I think a combination of all those things put together, the procedural aspect and the wide variety of diseases, things that you can see, I think putting those two things together, I think, you know, it was pretty easy to see that I wanted to do gastroenterology. And, you know, I really think that the compliance with the field is high from patients also. Eating, you know, taste is one of the 5 primary senses of the human body, and it's one that people find a lot of pleasure in. So people like to be compliant with those things to keep that up.
So then, Collin, can you tell us, and again, I have some insight into your story, so it makes it a little bit easy, but can you tell us a little bit about your rotation at Peconic Bay and your interactions with Dr. Cerrone and how that influenced your decision and where things went from there?
Oh man, I can't believe you still remember that. That was so long ago. But yeah, Dr. Cerrone is a gastroenterology physician currently at Northwell Peconic Bay. Yeah, she was definitely my first step into the GI world. I was doing my third year core internal medicine rotation there, and they allowed me to see some of the subspecialties, which I loved. And I think that's important for medical students to have that, you know, not just be on a medicine floor, but see what else they have to offer, whether it be ICU or cardio or whatever else. But I digress. So Dr. Cerrone was the first GI physician that I met, and I was with her for those 2 weeks. And you know, she was just so passionate about the field, and she just recently graduated. And she showed me all the things, and she was patient enough with me, brand new student, to teach me all these things and to show me all these procedures and kind of to explain every single step and why it is they do what they do and what it is they do. So I think having that positive influence really showed me what I could do with that field if I were to go into it. So I really thank Dr. Cerrone for that step.
And then just so people have the history, how did you find me? I remember telling you, like, when you first sat in my office, I don't know if you want me as a mentor, because I'm a little nutty, obviously, which you figured out. But tell me how you ended up in my office. Can you tell us a little bit about that story from your side?
Yeah. And at the time I didn't know it, and you were really telling me the truth. I thought you were just exaggerating, but you're a maniac, Dr. Storch. you're a crazy workhorse. Yeah, you really didn't lie to me. I didn't know what I signed up for, but in a good way.
Yeah, tell me how you got to my office, though. Start with that.
Yeah. So Dr. Storch was one of my professors for NYITCOM. He gave one of the lectures on physiology. The exact contents escape me now, but I remember at the end of the lecture, he had a slide, and he was kind enough to give his insight and give help to whatever students whoever, not even just students, anyone that needed it, he was there for. And I didn't really know how he had the time for that. So knowing that I was interested in gastroenterology and knowing that's what I wanted to do starting from that time, I knew I had to get my foot in the door somehow because I knew it was the most competitive IM specialty. So the same motto from my younger days applies: reach for the stars. So the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to end up back on Earth. So that's what I did. I shot my shot, and I sent a message to Dr. Storch. I sent a message to you and saying, hey, do you have any insight? Do you have any help? And, do you have any research? Because research is always quintessential to any subspecialty that's competitive, any specialty that's competitive. And I sent out an email, and that's how I end up in your office. And I remember you were like, sure, I have research, but I have something way more interesting that I think will not only help your resume, but will forward the osteopathic profession as a whole. So, and I was like, oh man, what am I getting myself into? I just wanted some research. I just wanted some insight. I don't know what it is, but something I've learned is, especially at this stage of your training, you never want to turn down any opportunities. You want to make yourself available because you don't know what's going to be knocking at your door in the future. And you always want to try your best and make yourself available to the people that are giving you a chance, and never take that for granted. So, and that's what I wanted to do. So I was extremely grateful. And then you told me about this idea of this podcast and explaining why DOs do what we do and how we do it. And the rest is kind of history.
Just for the audience, so Collin picked up the ball. I had this idea, but I did not have the time to develop the podcast. And he basically single-handedly, I helped recruit some of the interviewees, and Collin picked up the ball. And I think specifically episode 1 through 5, which I think 5 is Dr. Elkowitz, were probably to date some of the best that we've recorded. I think they're all excellent. Collin, do you feel that you learned a lot interviewing these physicians as you started the podcast?
That's a great question. And I think that's one of the reasons why this podcast is so helpful. One of the things I talked about earlier was life experience and being young. By virtue of being young, you just see less things. You just don't have as much experience as other people who have been alive and doing these things longer. So what's the next best step? The next best step is to talk to these people who have been through this and who have done this, so they can share their clinical pearls and their insights of why they're doing what they've been doing for a whole lifetime. Some people have been doing this longer than I've been alive. So they're obviously going to know why they're still doing this and why they love the field and why they went into it and what they wouldn't do again. So talking to these people and being able to listen to their wisdom, I think has made me more insightful and has given me a better idea of what I want to pursue and how I want to pursue it. And I think that it can be said for some of these other people listening to the podcast, and it could help guide them and help avoid some of these pitfalls of where these previous physicians have gone, or where to advance and where to make sure that they take advantage of and to pursue at the same time.
Collin, when I pitched you on the podcast, I think part of my pitch was, listen, everybody's going to have some sort of research on their resume, but I don't think anyone else applying to residency is going to have a podcast. Can you talk to the listeners or anyone maybe that's thinking about joining our crew and working on the podcast with us, how the podcast came up in interviews and if you think that it helped you?
Like I said before, I'm not a program director. I'm just I'm just one of the interns, and I have only limited insight into the interview process. But that being said, and after being through it, I can say that this was definitely talked about pretty much in every single interview. I can't say whether this is valued more than research. I can't say like if me and another applicant had the same exact USMLE and COMLEX scores, but the only thing was different was they had research and I also have research. If they had, like, let's say one piece of research and I had 0 pieces of research, but I had the podcast, would the podcast be weighed more than the research or vice versa? So I think it's important to distinguish yourself and walk on the path that is not often walked, but also at the same time cover your bases and have the things that are usually done, like the research. So I do have the research in my background, and also I wanted a way to look good on my resume. It's always an arms game, unfortunately, and applicants are always going to get better. And this is one of the things that I was passionate about, and that also would help me on my resume. So, having this on your resume, I think is fantastic because it not only shows that you're doing something different, but it gives you things to talk about. And I think that's super important during the interview, because when they ask you questions, if you don't have a good answer, they're gonna think, who is this guy? He has nothing to say. He has nothing valuable to share. And by being part of this podcast, whenever they would ask me questions, like a common question would be, name a time where you had to be a leader. And, I was very easily able to talk about this as an example. I led this podcast with Dr. Storch and a couple of other students. I was able to build this podcast from the ground and have, hundreds of listeners for each episode. And I was able to direct a team and coordinate with the rest of my team and make this into something that people would actually want to listen to. And I think that's also important because this kind of mimics medicine in a weird way. And, having a team and where you have to make decisions, that's kind of like being on the floor, being in the ICU or CCU, right? You're going to be on the floor with a team, with a multidisciplinary team. You're going to have the social work, you're going to have nurses, you're going to have fellows, you're going to have attendings, and you have to talk to everyone to make sure that the patient gets the best care, just like how you have to talk to the editors, you have to talk to the interviewers, you have to talk to the interviewees to make sure that your product is polished and is presentable.
Collin, that was awesome. I'm going to wrap up in a minute. I have one last question, but I just want you to know that I am very proud of you and everything that you've accomplished. And I'm very excited to see everything that you do in the future. My last question for you is, you ready? And you know the last question already, Collin, because you've asked it a bunch of times, but I'm going to ask it a little bit different. So tell me the best piece of advice that you've heard on the podcast from another physician that you would say is your favorite. Because we ask that question every episode. Can you think of one piece of advice? I'll even give you a second to think about it. But one piece of advice that somebody gave that maybe wasn't even their piece of advice, was from somebody else that you would say was the most profound to you.
That's a tough question because I didn't think you were going to put a spin on it, and I had an answer ready because that answer, the original question was name one piece of advice that a mentor gave you. And not to be cheesy, but I think just to answer both those questions, I think the answer to the one that you've given me actually, and it's not just because it's you, it's because I think it stuck with me the most and it's resounded with me, is that you should always be available, always be there to take these opportunities and never take them for granted, and always be there because you don't know who's going to vouch for you. So you always want to do your best for that person and always take these opportunities and kind of just be a yes man while you're building your way up. And not just for the sake of being a yes man. Also, you have to do things that you take pride in. In terms of from someone else, that's a hard one. Weirdly enough, I one of the things I remember is be nice to the nurses.
that was Tara. That was Tara Lieberman.
Yeah,
and I think that's huge. That's a good one. That's probably the best one, and she'll be proud that you said that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because as a med student, you have interaction with the nurses, but it's kind of limited. But you really don't know until you're there. Like, it really makes or breaks your, not even just your day, and it affects the whole patient care because they could really make your life hell. But a good nurse will be there for you and for the patient and coordinate with you. And otherwise, they wouldn't be, and they'll be asking you every single little thing, even though they know the answer to, and they'll just tell you stupid things like MD aware if they don't like you. So you have to always be sure to be nice to them and coordinate with them. Well, and to be real, one of the best advices, not from you, that I've heard from the podcast, other than be nice to nurses, is I remember that it's a multidisciplinary team. So you have to coordinate with everyone, and everything is a chess piece that has to be working together to collaborate and to make sure that how to get efficient patient care, because it's not always just going to be one physician. It's going to be everyone involved, and that's how you make the best of patient care. And I don't remember exactly who said that, but I think that was the best piece of advice, other than the ones I've said earlier.
I think that might be your advice, Collin. I don't remember that from any individual.
No, I don't think that's my advice. I'm not profound enough for that. I'm not far along enough for that yet.
It's interesting, Collin. I'm reading a book is called Tribal Leadership. It was actually recommended on a different book that I read from the late Tony Hsieh. And it's an excellent book, but he talks about different levels of tribal leadership, different levels of leadership. And he talks about level 3 being sort of egocentric and level 4 being embracing the team. And I think what you're talking about is a level 4 tribal leadership, where even though that you're the physician and you're the captain of the ship, you're bringing all of the other pieces, as you put it, into the patient's care and bringing everybody together, and no one can function without the other members of the tribe.
I agree. And not to cheat your advice, I know you're very busy too, Dr. Storch. You really need another one. I think the other piece of advice would be, and I remember, is Dr. Alkowitz, right? Read one thing every day, right? Because
that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Because, medical knowledge is something that you can never fully master, right? Like, a true master is always going to be an eternal student, and there's always going to be something else to learn. No one person is going to be able to learn everything, especially with all the innovations happening. So the least someone can do, especially a student or a resident or someone in their training phase, is to read about something every day and further their knowledge, because otherwise, it's hard to learn, hard to grasp everything.
I agree. And again, in the immortal words of Dr. Dave Elkowitz, Dean at Hofstra Medical School, DO, is if you learn one thing every day, at the end of 365 days, 365 things. And that's kind of a lot.
365 more things that I knew.
Collin, thank you so much for spending the night with us and talking to us. And congratulations on your residency. And we know you're going to do great things in the future.
I love to be here. And hopefully I can come back one day, when I'm in a different position, and give more insight. And I love all the listeners, and thank you for making the podcast to what it is today.
Thank you, Collin.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.